Uh, what are your thoughts on the whole situation as it stands right now?
Chaos, distortions, opportunities to change.
Do you agree with how it's been handled thus far by the university and by the national fraternity and all of that?
I believe that both parties made the best decision that they could at the time. I don't want to second guess them because I don't have all of the information that they had or used to make those decisions.
How do we end racism, not on this campus, but just in the nation as a whole?
As a teacher, I always believe that I teach best what I live. I also believe that students learn most of their significant lessons by interacting with people who are culturally different, not sitting in the classroom beside them or behind them or in front of them, but having face-to-face dialogues, the encounter. It's always the encounter that will allow us to get past our stereotypes and overgeneralizations and all of the other things that stand between us.
Did you ever think that, I mean, because you grew up during the civil rights era. I mean,
Oh, yes.
you were with, I heard all the stories.
Okay.
You're a big player in civil rights. Did you ever think that you would see something like that in 2015, something like this?
I always thought it was possible. And it's not that it's happened and I didn't think I would see it. It's happened and I prayed that I wouldn't see it. And so that's a qualitative difference. I know that racism exists, and I know that racism will continue as long as we have human relations. But to minimize it, to curtail it, to try to prevent as much as we can, that's what I'm concerned about. In answer to your question, I was disappointed, not surprised. What's disappointing is to realize that what's playing out now is very similar to what happened when I came to university in 1967. And I've told countless individuals, I had hoped that I would never see the Civil War being fought in academia in terms of ideology and words, hateful words, and yet that was always been a possibility.
How do we make sure that this story doesn't die? How do we make sure that them being expelled, all the protests, all the student and faculty coming together, how do we make sure that this doesn't die out after spring break? Because it's about to be a week off, and people are going to be thinking of other things. How do we make sure that when we come back, we're all still together on the same issue and understand that this is important and this needs to be our focus?
I know the leaders of some of these splinter groups, and I also know the individuals who are in Unheard, which is a major group. They're not going to let it go away. They're not going to take a spring break and pack it in and say, okay, we've done our thing. They're going to be vigilant. It's not what happens after spring break that concerns me. It's what happens after summer break. In the answer to your question, which is a very good question, by the way, what do? Students who indeed are concerned about this should put this on the top of their list to do when they come back. But then while they're away, they've got to practice some of these things that they say that we're not doing here, like getting to know people who are culturally different, learning as much as you can about people who are different from each of us. So this is not a lesson that we learn academically in a classroom or on a campus. It's a lesson that we must live wherever we are, on and off the campus. So what do? Start practicing some of those things that you say you want to see happen.
Did you think that did you think that there was a racism problem before this?
Yes.
Here on this campus?
Yes.
You did? And why do you say that?
In during that civil rights periods of the 60s, 70s, and primarily the 80s, we were waging war on hatred and racism and all the other pernicious isms, and mostly racism. We declared victory, and we'd only won some battles. And I had a firm belief that it wasn't over yet, folks. I use this analogy. For individuals who thought that the election of Barack Obama had then moved us to a post-racial era, they were deluding themselves. No, racism has to be fought year in, year out, century in, century out. It's not like a part-time voluntary activity that you're going to do and then you pack it in and go home and say, we've done it. There's a significant gap, I think, between the 80s and now. And during that period, a considerably large number of our students were exposed to culturally desegregated, not necessarily integrated schools. And they have come to the University of Oklahoma thinking that we no longer have those issues because I went to high school, some of them will say, or middle school with people from different cultural backgrounds. What they did not do, they didn't really have significant interactions or they didn't integrate with them. Those campuses, and they're still in the elementary, secondary, and here at the University of Oklahoma, we were sharing geography, but not relationships. Go to the dining halls if you want to see how far we have not come in terms of desegregating. You see clusters of individuals eating. Cluster here, you'll have Asian students. Clusters here, you'll have African American students. Clusters here, you'll have white students. Cluster here, you'll have non-Greeks. Cluster here, you'll have Greeks. See, we've got to get out of those silos. We've got to share a common space called all of the space. That's how we break it.
Finish this sentence for me. Racism ends when blank.
When it no longer is a viable word in our vocabulary. That's when it ends. Racism ends when we human beings, decide that there are some words, like the N word, the B word, and all of the other words, are not appropriate. Racism ends when we indeed get control of our words and then our behaviors. It ends when we start acting like civilized, humane human beings. I respect you, you respect me. The right to be free implies the right to be different. None of us is free until all of us are free. Once we incorporate that, then that's when we've gotten there. I ask my students, what is hatred good for? The answer, absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And our children must have that mindset. We must have that mindset, and then we go forward. My grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, they think it's nonsense, it's foolishness, what we're doing. And then they, heaven forbid, they'll go to a college campus and they'll see that a lot of people didn't think that racism and hatred was nonsense. On both sides of that issue, incidentally. There's another aspect of this that we have to deal with, and very, very, very honestly. For a long, long time, social and behavioral scientists said this. Minorities cannot be racist because they're all oppressed people. Racism comes from the minority and the majority group. Every individual who has been oppressed or whose peoples have been oppressed will have an opportunity to oppress someone else. Do you take an opportunity to do that? Yes or no? Each of us have to answer that. When will it end? When we declare a true victory. In our house, for example, there are certain things you don't say. In our community, there are certain kinds of behaviors that we don't engage in or condone. You're asking me to imagine something that seems almost unimaginable to me. You're asking a veteran of too many wars in terms of civil rights to imagine what life would be like without fighting the wars. I don't know when it'll end. I honestly don't know. But I do know that each of us can end it in our space, in our personal spaces.